Hello and welcome to D-SETI. This talk is called The Red Grid Mark, Obviously Geometric. This is a video in the Universal Language video series. If you don't know what ruler and compass geometry constructions are, or anomalous markings on the body, or want to learn about crop circles, please do start at the beginning of this video series for much needed context in what we're talking about. So the red grid mark, as you can see in this image, is a regular pattern of something like a light or energy burn. Sometimes it is confused with markings from suction against grid-like patterns such as a bath drain, mesh shorts, or wristband. In the inquiry performed by investigators at experientialdreaming.com, they found about 5% of these marks could be reduced back to suction, but 95% are unexplained and exhibit this sort of stereotypical and qualities. They are actually associated with potent dreams and entities like extraterrestrial spirits or angels. About 64% of the experiencers of this phenomenon report strange dreams, and that non-trivial portions of them believe these extraordinary hypotheses associated with their markings. And oftentimes these markings are associated with intuition of personal meaning. So here is a typical pattern, a typical diamond pattern of the red grid mark phenomenon. Here is a typical hex grid. It's a hexagonal dot grid. As you can see, this is something that is reminiscent of the tree of life. So here we're seeing sacred geometry as well as regular geometry being expressed in anomalous ways that are typical. So you might not see that there is similarity in the grid between this grid and this grid, but there is immense similarity when we apply the ruler and compass method of geometry to these marks. So it appears like an energy or light burn. It involves regular hexagonal or square grids. It involves creative geometries and placements. Mostly these are happening at night, but sometimes they happen during the day. They are associated with entity dreams, as I've mentioned, but sometimes they happen during waking phase consciousness, and we'll talk a little bit about that because dreams sometimes happen during waking phase consciousness. There are two main collections of data. First, there is the Facebook group, the Red Grid Mark Phenomena Experiencers and Researchers, who is a great place. They receive a lot of photos of these as well as help people make sense of it a little bit, insofar as like, hey, this is an unexplained phenomena, share your photos. We'll share information when we get it. They've conducted a survey. I'm working with a dream survey with them to collect more data about this. So this is a great place to get information. As well as experientialdreaming.com, they did a research investigation from around 2012, I believe, to 2019, and they've published their data as a PDF on their website for $10, but have a lot of supplementary or supporting documentation on their website, and that has really looked into hundreds of these cases as well. We're talking about thousands of people, including I've worked with a Harvard-trained plastic surgeon who received these marks and found them to be anomalous and commissioned my services to find meaning in them. So that should give you some level of clue that this is unexplained by Western science. If a Harvard-trained plastic surgeon whose job it is to understand how the human skin works can explain this and has turned to my dream work practices and hypnosis to help find meaning, then I would say it's probably unexplained, and that thousands of people aren't crazy or finding strange meaning. This is a phenomenon. We need to research it. The geometry behind these, it can be constructed using the ruler and compass methods of geometry. Please do check out my video on that in this series. It is essential to understanding the implications of what this means. It means someone intelligent made these marks using technology. That is what it means. And that intelligence is like us and understands our own theory of mind, at least in regards to geometry. You can use a unity radius circle, to build the grid. And so you can use, like, say with a hexagonal grid pattern, you use the flower of life, sacred geometry pattern, the overlapping circles, to build it. The radius of those overlapping circles is the unity radius of that grid. So now we can say, hey, the unity radius is like between this dot and that dot, 2 inches. That gives a measurement and a communication. It's a hexagonal grid of 2 inches unity radius, tells you exactly how to generate it, right? And there's instructions in the geometry. Typical grid patterns that we see are hexagonal dots, hexagonal diamonds, square grids, and maybe something like a golden ratio grid as well. The radiuses of the dots or squares are in whole number ratios to the unity radius. This means something very, very significant. Either the dots are emerging from an unknown physical principle, or else they're designed to be that way using a similar method of geometry. Like that's just incredible to me. So the intensity of the dots, light or dark, appears to follow an unanalyzed diffusion pattern. I don't know what it is, but there seems to be meaning in it. There are sets of dots, maybe 1 to 40, that's a loose estimate, that share coordinate systems that are slightly similar but slightly different. And the alignment of these sets seems to vary across individuals. It gives me the impression of a photo booth style exposure using something like a darkroom projector through a stencil onto the photosensitive skin of the experiencer. Sometimes the experiencer moves, and you can kind of see that. Sometimes that stencil is applied multiple times, and you can see that when we do the ruler and compass methods of geometry. So, like I was saying, the best theory for me, the hypothesis that I'm using to do the geometry, and I'm not saying this is a scientific hypothesis, but I'm saying this is a geometric model that seems to produce predictions, that seems to have enough data where we can triangulate much of the optics involved so that we can get estimates, as we could build a geometric model of these things and get estimates as to how big or how much range of motion the tools of manipulation of these stencils have when they apply them to the bodies of these experiencers. How incredible is that? The model here is like spray paint over a stencil, right? A spray paint over a stencil. Like I said, I'm also using the idea of a darkroom projector and photosensitive paper. There is an overlapping grid pattern. It feels like a photo booth or an X-ray experience, and I'll show you some images of slight movement. And then I'll also show you how these templates, how these regular templates are sort of moved around to produce larger grid images. There's also an interesting phenomenon around the hard edges and soft edges of diffusion, especially expressed in single or double row/column grid patterns. And I'll show you photos of those. Because the diffusion pattern is something like a light bulb or a spotlight. You can recognize it, right? But then there's hard edges in it. And especially, right, there's a horizontal line, the dots diffuse nicely, but on the top and bottom, where there should be a grid line, there's not. This means there's an intentional covering up of a grid stencil, it sort of looks like to me. And when we see like half-filled marks, like that's a really kind of strong indication. So here is an example, right, of what I'm talking about. This is a square grid, regularly discerned, right? So you can build this using, I think they call it the flower of the elements, not flower of life. The 4 overlapping circles used to generate a square. You can extend that out. You have the grid. Then the circle radius is very, very clear. You can get that through bisecting the unity radius of that grid. And then here we see this alternating kind of light-dark pattern. Which has soft diffusion patterns, so the dots themselves sort of have a sense of diffusion within them or a variation of intensity, but there is a clarity of lines around it. So if we were to, we kind of assume that if this were a kind of an indefinite grid that's not being covered up or limited by the stencil dimensions, then something else might show up. Likewise, we have this, which involves a hexagonal grid, not a square grid, very similar ratio of the dot to the unity radius, and a sense of both the hard and soft diffusion patterns, creating this. This involves intentional placement on the body. This is, and we'll get to that, but it's on one butt cheek and there's another butt cheek, and it's funny. The person found it, thought it was humorous. I thought it was humorous. It's I feel humor in that communication, and this actually is the humor. I said, these guys are funny. Like they put Pythagorean decad on someone's butt cheeks, right? Like when I was thinking about Pythagoreans, and I go, this is just so weird. Like I think something's happening here, and that's part why this one image, right, made me go, I think they're like funny people. I think we can talk to them. I think there's some reason why we're having this strange dot-based communication, but I think we can make jokes with them. So here is movement in the diagonal pattern. This sort of gives a sense of movement, diffusion pattern, and things like that, starting to feel discernible. Here is one of the reasons why I say that we are dealing with multiple templates or multiple applications of the same template, because in each of these, this highly geometric form, this circular form, it involves regular hex grids set along a circle, and it's generally a perfect circle. However, the lining up of the quadrants is slightly off, and that offness is consistent around the edges of those quadrants and is inconsistent with the coordinates within each of the separate quadrants. So here it seems like we've got four pieces of a pizza that are slightly lined up and slightly not. And I think it sort of feels like they use 2 or 3 anchor dots and they go, okay, these are lined up. It's sort of like how you use 2 dots in a straight line to extend it much further. So it's sort of like that feeling. It involves, it seems to me, dexterous application of these templates. And you can see that too by the Vesica Pisces pattern of the circles lining up. So I think if we were to look at this one and analyze it further, as well as several other similar marks, we might get a sense of how big these templates are and how dexterous the applier is. So it's really important to know that diamonds are inverted hexagons. So we've got the hexagonal dot grid, and then we have the diamond grid. How do they relate? Well, they're the same grid. They're mathematically the same grid. They are communicating in different ways. Here's another example of a square grid. This is based on the 1/5 ratio to unity, like a crop circle. This one's interesting in that I believe it's on a child's face, which is a relatively rare placement, except for children. They tend to have small grids on their foreheads, as opposed to hexagonal grids on their back. I mean, like, what sort of meaning is there? Well, we need to start measuring the geometry. The 1/5 ratio, I have not encountered that. I've seen 1/4, 1/8, 16th, but not 1/5. And so it feels as if this is a unique language or something like that, being applied in each unique time and place. Here we have the square grid, whole number fractions, and the hard and soft diffusion patterns. Once again, this reminds me of the shape of the tree of life, but it is in a square grid, not a hexagonal grid. So that's very interesting. It appears to be, this appears to me to be 1 or 2 blasts with a light source, creating a soft diffusion pattern, as well as an intentional blocking up of the stencil, so that like the dots on the leftmost column aren't all showing up or whatever. So That is a clue that I haven't really explored deeper. Once again, here's square grid patterns, whole number fraction, hard and soft diffusion patterns. This is the Pythagorean decad that inspired my CE5 style invitation based on this. And it's analyzed, it's using a flower of life or hexagonal grid. And then here is a very typical hex pattern. This is the hexagonal grid. If you connected those dots in a circle, you would see the seed of life. It's interesting that one of the dots is missing. And one of the things here is this photo is on a 13-year-old boy, I believe, and found this mark. But right around then, the mom snapped a photo of him in this landscape, and there's this blue triangle with like a band of lights and more light coming in. And people say it's a lens flare, but its geometry doesn't add up. It doesn't look like a lens flare, and it's pregnant with meaning. And it may actually be an image of a template being applied, right? It may actually be a clue to how big these templates are. We may actually use this image to triangulate estimations of how big this geometric model that is needed to send light through these different templates are to produce this shape and size. We've got measurements here. We know how tall he is. We know the distances between those molds. We can then deduce the rest of it. How interesting. So there are several different types of intelligences here involved. Once again, the grid designer, the designer of the geometry, they know ruler and compass geometry. They know the Pythagorean decad. They know the tree of life, it seems to me. They know circles. They know squares. They know, it seems to me, golden ratio. They know whole number ratios. It is intelligence, right? The congruence testing with this says, hey, actually, I think this is highly meaningful. I think the placement on the body is likely highly meaningful too. So we've got the application coordinator. This is the person that goes, or the intelligence that goes, now is the time and place to do this. Here on the body is the place to do this. And that level of timing actually is sensitive to what the experiencer is doing. It most of the time happens in a sleep or dream or nap state, sometimes in other phases, but is sometimes very personally meaningful, and some of the time they actually respond to invitations like, mark me, show me that you're here and listening. Lo and behold, the next day you see a mark. So there is some level of intelligent coordination around this. Then finally we've got the template technician, who is literally taking the stencil or the technological grid that the designer drew. I don't know if this technician knows ruler and compass geometry. It seems like they are more of an applier of a machine or a technology than the designer of a grid, but they might be the same intelligence. We don't know. It's sort of like operating an X-ray machine or a photo booth. And it seems to me to involve manual or dexterous applications of a light machine or a stencil to apply either multiple overlapping templates at once, so putting multiple templates down, shining it once. But I would say because of the movement of the same templates in the grids, we're seeing one template being applied multiple times when we see these complex figures. They seem good at their job. I must say, they seem good at their job. It's really hard to discern the subtle coordinate systems because they look very similar. And it's really hard to discern that on skin with weird angles. But it's close, but not perfect. So that's really a sign that they are using an abstraction of this ruler and compass geometry. So there's been an abstraction process of this ruler and compass geometry to a stencil, to a grid, right? It's like copying a crop circle by drawing a grid over it and using a grid to transfer the image instead of using the ruler and compass method. That's the level of two different types of intelligences involved. So it is associated with dreams. 64% of experiencers report strange dreams. Angels, ETs, spirits, we're not quite sure, but it does seem to be at a rate that's significantly higher than than the mainstream or control rates of like the mainstream population. It happens during the day, but similar to like missing time events, daydream, nap, hypnotic driving, that kind of thing. There's been only a few cases of full-on like alpha state consciousness, and I'm not even sure if those really would classify. Most people go, it happened during the day. I go, yeah, that's interesting. It happens a lot of times at dreams. They're like, oh, but actually I was daydreaming about X, Y, and Z. So there's an overlap. I'm not saying it's causal. I'm saying there's some meaningful correlation here. What does this mean? What does all of this mean? Why are we talking about this? Well, doing the ruler and compass constructions, congruence testing them, really do prove we're working with mathematical objects. We're working with geometry and not artifacts of, not just artifacts of a poorly performed medical procedure or something else. This is geometric. This is intelligent design. This may be sneaky humans. This may be, in the case of the red grid mark that resolves to suction woundings, the wounding really does come from intelligent design, right? Like someone who designed the bath drain or the mesh shorts or the lawn chair or whatever with the grid pattern knew the geometries as well, right? Given that we have these anomalous contexts, it seems that the bulk of these, the majority of these are anomalous and coming from these anomalous sources. We might now start to deduce what the mark maker's intelligence is like, which really does involve observation. They have an effective theory of our mind, and they work with ruler and compass constructions or their equivalent to it. They're expressive in objective, interpersonal, and subjective means of communication, meaning if you have a mark, you might likely have a constellation of events that have happened in your life around that. And finally, this inquiry comes out of an association with CE5 or intentional contact, which means that we are, as a people, are sort of in later stages of a documented and meaningful conversation with non-human intelligences. I am not offering my work here as proof of this. I'm saying that there's a much larger body of work and understanding coming forward week by week, day by day, about the nature of our contact with non-human intelligences in this world. So this comes out of D-SETI, which stands for the Dream Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or the Dream Studies of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, depending on your perspective. So doing the congruence tests and saying that, hey, there's intelligence, life like we know it, that is explicitly associated with extraterrestrial dreaming means that these marks upon the body are meaningful contributions to the discernment of whether or not we're searching for or studying extraterrestrial intelligence. D-SETI offers DreamWork sessions and educations through the work of me. I have a master's in psychology, certificate in hypnotherapy, and I'm a PhD student in integral noetic science. Please do be mindful about working with ET contact dreams because they are triggering, taboo, and projection prone. So please be mindful. So thank you for being with me. Thank you for exploring some of this geometry. Thousands of people have experienced this anomalous mark, the red grid mark phenomena. Thousands of people have reported it. Probably many, many thousands more have seen it and not even thought about it. Go, oh, I thought maybe I sat funny on a chair, or who knows. It's really hard to understand that you've been marked on your body by an intelligence that does not make itself known in waking phase consciousness. It's really hard to relate to that, knowing that you've had a meaningful engagement in dreams with the intelligence that has marked your body in mysterious ways that you can't figure it out. But I'm here to say, actually apply some mindfulness, right? Start working with your dreams. Start engaging in a multimodal, so that's art, music, science. This is literally the liberal arts. that seems to have been erased from our public school curriculum in favor for more grid-like or technical applications of these ruler and compass stuff. We are now the technicians. We don't have enough understanding to go into the mind of the grid designer, at least as prepared by the public school system. I don't think that's a mistake, and I think some of the most powerful advocacy work we can do is re-educating ourselves in the Western liberal arts tradition, in the quadrivium and the trivium, understanding music, astronomy, geometry, reading, writing, arithmetic, that sort of thing. We bring this all together, history, that kind of thing. We need to use ruler and compass methods geometry. We don't need the algebraic or formula style math that we've been taught as kids, because that means we're applying a system we don't understand, perhaps like those technicians are. And so we need to go up, and we need to do that work of understanding this geometry that they're clearly speaking in. And we need to also do that at the same time as being artistic and creative and engaged with our own dream life, because they are telling us what's happening in our dreams. The association with these marks and dreams is not an accident, and it is significant when you compare it with the standard rates of dreaming of extraterrestrial beings or extraordinary things. These are significant communications, and people feel they are meaningful and significant, and we really just need to honor the information that's coming through clearly and distinctly, supported by obvious proof of intelligent and intentional communication. Thank you for approaching that. I know it's rather hard, but I want to share this testimony that it's okay. It's not creepy in the way that we're afraid it's creepy. I mean, why wouldn't they show their faces? Why wouldn't they show up in the daytime? Well, because if they're working with dreams or dream levels, they can't. It turns out there's many phases of consciousness and many ways of knowing, and we have to engage all of them, not just the one very, very subtle band of consciousness that we have been coerced into by public school systems, by the erasure of the circle from mathematical from our mathematical curriculum. Let's bring it back and have a conversation. It'll take like 6 hours of education, 2 hours to learn the methods or whatever. It's easy. So let's do that. Let's learn that as a people and talk to them. That's what they're asking us to do. It's pretty clear. You do the congruence test, make some of your own art in that style, see what happens. Send out some invitation. Let go of your expectations, of course. I mean, they responded to me in a way I didn't expect. I thought this series would be an ASMR series of me doing sacred geometries, that sort of thing. I didn't think ETs were involved when I started dreaming of geometry and working with it. So let go of expectations. You're really capable of doing this. Your mind will work with this and go, I know what this is. I recognize circles, I recognize lines. I can intuit meaning and understanding. I'm just giving you some encouragement and hopefully inspiration, because these anomalous markings are so clear and obviously geometric. They need an explanation, and Western mainstream science is not giving that. And they don't even care. I asked, is anyone else researching this geometry? Nobody else is. Why not? Because nobody else understands the ruler and method compass of geometry and honors dream communications. This is not new information. This is what the ancient Greeks did. This is what many other cultures are doing. But this has been erased from our public school education. And I'm on a bit of a rant here. But I'm really just astounded that there is no more investigation. It's so obvious we can deduce so much about this phenomenon that would teach us about the nature of light, about the nature of dreaming, about the nature of non-human intelligence contact. This is a big thing. There's a lot at stake. Thank you for being here, and I really do hope you deepen your practice with ruler and compass geometry.